Assalamu alaikum. I am Ahmed Ramadan, coming to you live with a special broadcast on the unfolding aggression of the US and Israel on Iran. Thank you so much for joining us. Over the next hour, we will discuss a few things that have unfolded over the last 48 hours or so, just to give some clarity to our viewers. I'm sure a lot of you are already aware that Israel and the US have jointly attacked unprovoked the nation of Iran. And Iran, in response, has retaliated, striking about 27 US bases across the Middle East, including striking Tel Aviv and other parts of Israel. And most of the time, mainstream media will not share with you some of the details that we are going to go through today. We also have a few guests for you that are experts in different areas that we will be sharing their expertise live on air as well. So just before we start off with one of our guests, I just want to give you a little bit of an overview of what has taken place. Now, we can go back all the way to 1953 when the UK and British and the US overthrew the democratically elected leader of Iran, Mossadegh, who his plan was to nationalize the Iranian oil that was being taken by British Petroleum. And even though Mossadegh was negotiating with them to still give them back some of that, if not 50% of profit sharing, that was not enough for the US and British imperialists that wanted complete control over Iran's oil. So they overthrew Mossadegh and they installed one of the most brutal dictators ever, the Shah, in 1953. And he tortured people, he brutalized people, jailed people. There are many different reports of the types of very innovative torture methods they used during that time. And then in 1979, we know about the Iranian Revolution. So you can see from the beginning, there has been meddling from Western powers and Western imperialists in Iran trying to control their oil and their government and other things like that. So we can go into a lot more detail about this, but I just wanted to make sure that people understood this does not happen in a vacuum where, Iran, they're claiming that Iran wants a nuclear weapon and we need to attack them. They have been working on Iran for a very, very long time. And they are not, it's like with a lot of places in the Middle East, they cannot stop bombing and killing people across the Middle East. It's just something that they are addicted to, and they will, we see the continuation of doing that. But going back to what's taking place now, Iran actually had a nuclear deal with the US that they were upholding according to every independent body. They were abiding by it. There was no nuclear threat, and things were working. Trump came in 2018 and ripped that up. And after he ripped it up, after the US is the one that walked away from it, Iran continued to abide by that deal until 2019, when finally they started winding down some of their commitments because they saw that there was no benefit in sticking with this deal. So you could see who really the aggressor is and who are the ones that are trying to find any excuse to just bomb more countries. Now, before the start of what's taking place now, we know through the negotiating from Oman that Iran had actually agreed to Israel's, I mean, I might as well say it, but US's demand of the enriched uranium. Yet, Israel did not like the fact that negotiations were moving along, so they and the US decided to bomb Iran anyway. And they have killed the supreme leader of Iran, Khamenei, who was not hiding in a bunker, who did not flee to Germany, who was not hiding out in Miami. He was with his people in his home, knowing that assassination attempts were happening on his life, and decided to stick around with his people and become a martyr to his nation. So Iran has been striking back, and they've let all the other countries in the area know that if Israel and the US are using their bases there, they become legitimate targets for them. And that is what's happening. They've hit Qatar, they've hit the UAE, they've hit Kuwait, they've hit Saudi Arabia, and other countries as well. And obviously, they have been hitting Israel in retaliation and Tel Aviv. And we will go through some of that very soon. But to start off, let's go to our first guest. I'm just checking here to see who is the first one on our that we will be talking to. Give me one. Okay, we're gonna go to David right now. Sorry, I don't have his.
David Gibbs.
Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, got it right here. All right, Professor David Gibbs from the University of Arizona. So let's go to Professor David.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, David. Thank you for joining us. So what can you tell us about the latest of what you've been, following and what's unfolding right now?
Well, as I think as everybody knows, there was a sort of decapitation strike fired, I assume, by the United States. It might have been by Israel, that killed the Supreme Leader Khamenei. I believe also a whole series of Iranian top officials, including the defense minister, the head of the Revolutionary Guards Corps, and the
inside pocket.
And so I think that this was, an effort to sort of decapitate the leadership. I think it's unlikely to have a significant impact in the war. It may very well galvanize the Iranians. The Iranians, I'm sure, were prepared for this type of decapitating strike and were ready to replace their top officials when and if they're assassinated, as they were a few hours ago. So I don't see this as likely having a decisive impact. I think this was intended to basically end the regime through decapitation, maybe causing a popular uprising, but I think that's unlikely to happen. I think what you're going to get is continued Iranian attacks using their missiles in the way they did during the June War, the 12-day June War. No longer just attacking Israel, but attacking U.S. assets all over the Middle East. And also shutting down the Straits of Hormuz, which I believe they've already just begun to do. So this is a much broader war than what happened in the June War. And it's going to have a much broader global impact. This is not just a Middle East affair. This is going to be a global affair with global implications. For the longer term, I think it'll lead to nuclear proliferation. I think Khamenei was the main figure who opposed the development of actual nuclear weapons. He's gone now. And so the Iranians probably will opt to develop full nuclear weapons and delivery systems, which may well lead other countries in the region to develop them too, such as the Saudis and the Turks. I should add, basically, until now, the only country that's had nuclear weapons is Israel. But I think that's probably going to change given this war. And I think that's a very unfortunate and disturbing development and a threat to global security. But I do think that's going to be one of the long-term implications of this war. And it's one we're going to have to live with.
So you've touched on a lot of points there. And honestly, I want to get into all of them. But let's start with Khamenei, the supreme leader. Do you think that, like Trump, and I know obviously there are people within the U.S. that understand, but when we've seen interviews, for instance, with somebody like, the senator that interview with Tucker Carlson, when he asked him about Ted Cruz, when he asked him about how many people are in Iran and, what kind of demographics are there. Do you think like people like Trump and some of the people that are making these decisions understand what the supreme leader means to the people of Iran and to Shia people, but also Muslims around the world?
No, Trump in particular, I think, has a certain, he has a contempt for expert advice. And so I don't think he's seeking expert advice. There is expertise within the U.S. government on these questions, but I doubt Trump is relying on it very heavily. And I think he just has a certain image that American force is so powerful, it can do anything. That seems to be how he's working right now. In all probability, he's gotten, so to speak, in over his head, way over his head. And I think it's going to go badly, well, for everybody in the world, honestly, but I think particularly for the United States and Israel. Israel is going to pay a particularly heavy price, first of all, in destruction of much of its infrastructure, which is already beginning through Iranian missile attacks. But also, I think it's going to lead to a real sort of collapse of whatever little support it has in the world at this point in time, including in the United States.
I mean, just going on that point there, when they attacked Iraq, there was a coalition of countries that came together. Right now, it's big. Actually, Israel, from one of the reports I was listening to, Israel wasn't part of that just because they were not viewed, they were viewed as more of a liability to be part of that coalition, in regards to the kind of global image. But now it's basically the US and Israel.
Right. Yeah, no, there's not even superficial support from, let us say, Britain or any of our other closest allies. And, it does indicate, the United States and Israel are going way out on a limb here. And, there's nothing to suggest that they're going to get their way here. I think question is, what does the U.S. and Israel want? I think what the United States wants to do is to do Israel's bidding, which is what they're doing. And the objective of the U.S.-Israel war here, if it has any objective at all other than showing force, is to obviously regime change. I don't think it has anything to do with the issue of uranium enrichment. I don't think that was ever really an issue. It was a pretext to establish regime change, and either to set up essentially a vassal state under perhaps the Shah's son living in the United States for decades, and also possibly breaking up Iran into pieces, the way effectively they've done in Syria. And so I think that those are their objectives, and the chance of them achieving those objectives seem very small to me. If Iran, in the very unlikely event that they did overthrow the Islamic Republic, the more likely scenario is chaos and civil war. All right. And so I really don't see that that's going to lead to a regime friendly to Israel and the United States. It's unlikely.
I think they would welcome that chaos and civil war, to be honest.
You could be right. You could be right about that. On the other hand, you may be right. I would say if they do welcome chaos and civil war, they're acting irrationally, because basically chaos and civil war, there are all sorts of things that can produce long-term terrorism of the old-fashioned variety, which may occur anyway, by the way, as a retaliatory measure, given the what's going on right now. You get rival factions developing nuclear weapons and possibly using them. Chaos is never works out very well. And why Israel wants to promote chaos in its neighboring states as a rational strategy eludes me.
These are very complicated times. There's so many moving parts to it. I think there's clarity on international law and who's been violating it.
Yes.
And I think, just going back to touch on a point, what you were saying, with what happened in Venezuela, with Trump kidnapping the president there and his wife, he probably got some impression that, they could run another mission like that in Iran, maybe. And once they take out Khamenei, the rest of it will fall in line. But I think they misread that pretty badly.
And I think they got a certain amount of hubris from the quote-unquote success, at least the short-term success of the Venezuela operation, and thought they could repeat it in Iran. And that's very unlikely to work out that way. I suppose on the issue of legality, I'd point out that not only is it illegal under international law and a violation of the UN Charter, which forbids aggressive war, it's also a violation of U.S. domestic law, because the UN Charter is a treaty the United States has signed, and the U.S. Constitution says that treaties are the supreme law of the land. All right. So this is a violation also of U.S. law. But then again, I don't think legality has very much to do with what's going on here. This is power politics, and just pure power politics.
So what is your impression of how the U.S. population is reacting to their president, who ran on an anti-war campaign, has now started, he's bombed the most countries of any president so far, and he just started another, basically if this plays out, could be one of the most catastrophic wars to ever be started in the Middle East.
That's right. I agree. Well, there's no doubt the domestic politics here are very confusing, in that a lot of people indeed did vote for Trump, both in 2016 and again in 2024, on the assumption that he'd at least be less warlike than his Democratic opponents. And he encouraged that view, and he criticized people like the Cheney family, who were backing his Democratic opponent, as what he called them, radical war hawks. He said they were radical war hawks. He condemned the warmongers, for example. And I think a lot of people are surprised and astounded even by what's going on here, which is so directly contrary to what he was saying. His policy, of course, was America first. He's going to put America's interest first. And, by all indications, he's putting Israel's interest first. And that doesn't play very well with his base. And we've seen significant dissent from some of the key figures supporting him. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is an ultra-conservative congresswoman from Georgia, who is one of the most enthusiastic supporters of Trump, has openly condemned this war in the strongest terms and said this is not what we voted for when we voted for Donald Trump. Tucker Carlson, of course, has been very hostile to the idea of war with Iran. And so I think that there may be initially some very small degree of a support for him, just because there's some natural tendency of people to support the president in a crisis, but that'll fade very fast. And so this could very well be the full undoing of the Trump presidency.
Well, Professor David, thank you so much for joining us. I have so much more to ask you, but we have a few more guests and our time is limited. Maybe we will get you back on soon to discuss a little bit more. Thank you again.
I like that. Thank you for having me.
All right, I'd like to bring on our next guest, Sam Husseini. Thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you. Thank you so much for inviting me.
So let's start off by asking, what is your view? What is your take on what has unfolded in the last, about 48 hours or so?
Yeah, I think that it's a fairly predictable consequence of the long-term arc of U.S. Imperial dominance of the Middle East. They've taken out every regime that might not have simply acted as a proxy, from Iran to Syria to Libya, and now their stated goal apparently is to do regime change again in Iran, because there have been previous regime change in Iran. And I believe that the U.S. establishment is very skillful. Israel was conducting its genocide, and it very skillfully took out each of the opponents to it, one at a time. Major attacks on Hezbollah, for example, including the assassination of Nasrallah, pushing back against Ansar Allah in Yemen, and now going for what they pretend is the head of the snake. I mean, this is utter and complete lawless aggression, and beyond hypocrisy, to state the obvious. I mean,
Well, I
last
do
year
want to
the
ask you
UN.
about kind of how the U.S. and Israel have been really in overdrive imperialism and bombing different countries. I believe the U.S. is up to 10 countries now. Israel is up to 8 countries that they've attacked.
Yeah.
But
So it's a competition.
yeah, really the wrong scoreboard you want to be on. But before I get to discussing that a little bit more, I wanted to ask you, do you think that they have miscalculated at all how Iran would unfold?
I'm very wary of these notions. I think that a lot of people who claim to be critics of U.S. imperialism keep pretending that the U.S. has miscalculated, and I have grown very weary of this. I heard this a million times when it came to Syria. I heard this a million times when it came to Iraq, but in the end, the U.S. prevailed. The U.S. establishment is extremely powerful, and I am frankly sick and tired of people saying, oh, they've miscalculated, instead of doing what they need to do, which is to say, what can we do to undermine their imperialist prerogatives? And I don't think that engaging in wishful thinking is a useful endeavor. I focused, for example, vis-a-vis the genocide in Gaza, to organize people to do what is called Uniting for Peace, a mechanism to organize the countries of the General Assembly to effectively override the U.S. obstruction at the Security Council with 2/3 votes. There's a mechanism that was used against apartheid South Africa. I'm in South Africa right now, to impose mandatory sanctions against South Africa. We should be people who claim to be wanting to stop U.S. imperialism should not be sitting around eating popcorn and getting happy when a Iranian missile hits Israel. They should be figuring out how can we undermine the U.S. and Israeli imperial axis by exposing it, by organizing more effectively.
No, I hear what you're saying, and I think a lot of people have been watching the genocide unfold in Palestine and Gaza the last, 2 years and a bit, and just look for any kind of sliver of hope. But I also believe you're right. At the end of the day, we see that no matter how they're looked at, this imperialist agenda has always come out on top at the end. And maybe things are different this time, maybe it's not, but I don't think that people that are opposed to genocide, that are opposed to imperialism and war, need to sit back and just accept that things are going to be different this time. There needs to be some real action. And this is where maybe I'll ask you the next question. What can people do specifically then about what's, this kind of really hyperdrive, overdrive, imperialist war machine that is just so belligerent and unstoppable? I mean, one of the first acts they did was kill a school, girls' school, bomb a girls' school with over 100 girls get bombed, right? Like, it just sometimes leaves you speechless, like the brutality of it.
Yeah, but we can't be speechless. And, when the Epstein class isn't sexually abusing girls, they're slaughtering them, as we see. So we need to expose them further. I think we're all agreed on that. I offer two concrete proposals, one for people inside the United States and one for people outside the United States. For people outside the United States, as I indicated, this Uniting for Peace proposal to get your country. Petra of Colombia talked about doing this mechanism in September at the last UN meeting, but he got so little support that he didn't actually put it to a vote. There should be global movements for pushing this process to get countries to stop appeasing U.S. imperialism. We saw Russia and China fail to veto the so-called Board of Peace, which is a board of genociders and profiteers, and to move things to the General Assembly. And this is directly about Palestine because of the South Africa case, the Genocide Convention case. But it is a mechanism that can be used in other things. It could be used against the U.S. and Israeli aggression against Iran, for example. It could be used regarding Sudan. It could be used in many other instances if it is invigorated and if we actually push the limits of what the United Nations can do. So that would be my primary recommendation for people outside the United States. For people inside the United States, and I've written that extensively about that, people can go to Husseini.org and see my latest writings on that issue. My other recommendation for people in the United States is that the imperial structure inside the United States has basically captured the U.S. public by putting them in the two parties, which are both imperialist. They're different flavors. The Democrats are nuanced and slick and whatever, and Trump is brazen, but then pretends to be pro-peace. So it's, completely farcical. But ultimately, both establishment political parties are imperial parties, and people feel compelled to vote for one or the other of them because they despise the other one. And people need to break out of this. And I've set up a project called votepact.org. That's VOTEPACT.org that encourages people to pair up, right? So instead of, and this should especially take a hold in the Muslim and Arab American communities, but it should be even far wider than that. So instead of people canceling out each other, one voting for an imperialist Democrat and one voting for an imperialist Republican, to pair up and vote for candidates that are pro-peace and that are pro-liberty, whether that's the Libertarians or the Greens or the Socialists, whoever, but to siphon votes away from these genocidal political parties. I think that is a major imperative of people who want real change, who are inside the United States.
So those are some very good concrete steps for any of our viewers that want to take a look and see where they can actually influence some change. But I wanted to take a step back a little bit. And a lot of people that watch, mainstream media are maybe getting snippets of news here and there, but aren't getting the full picture. I wanted to just ask you to give us kind of a little overview of this conflict and how we ended up here.
Well, as I say, I'm in South Africa, so I've been in transit, so I haven't been focusing on the blow by blow as much as I ordinarily would. But it's obvious that the general contours are naked aggression, similar to what we saw last summer, right? Last summer, the U.S. was pretending to be involved in negotiations, and Israel and then the United States moved towards aggression against Iran. So we're seeing something of a replay of that. We're also seeing something of a replay in that if people remember, before the U.S. and Israeli attacks last summer, Trump for a period was seeming to be critical of Netanyahu. And then two things happened simultaneously. One was Elon Musk posted a statement, the owner of X and a military contractor. Elon Musk posted that Trump was in the Epstein files. Have a nice day. And Schumer, the genocidal Zionist Democratic Party leader, chastised Trump, saying, "Taco, Trump always chickens out, and Trump is chickening out in confronting Iran." So you had them effectively pushing Trump to attack Iran, which he then hand in glove did with Israel. And now we see similarly these pressures, more disclosures regarding the Epstein files, which I think need to be studied. I mean, you saw Epstein say, "I am the representative of the Rothschilds," to Peter Thiel, the head of Palantir, for example, and so on. But there is the possibility that this is effectively being used as some sort of leverage against Trump. But the fact remains that the Iranians, it seems, were being incredibly conciliatory, according to the leadership of Oman, which was acting as a go-between in terms of the negotiations. But the U.S. doesn't want negotiations. They want to commit aggression. I don't know exactly what U.S. goals are. It could be to try to foment animosity between Shiite and Sunni Muslims, for example, since we have Iran, launching retaliatory strikes towards predominantly Sunni countries. That could be their game to distract further from the Israeli perpetration of genocide. Um, or they claim that they want some kind of reforms and so on in Iran. That's obviously a lie. They've lied throughout. I think that they sometimes benefit from there being failed states, as we saw in the cases of Libya and Syria and Iraq. They want to have the people of the region be disorganized and incapable of defending themselves.
Yeah, in the previous, our previous guest, Professor Gibbs, was saying that that chaos and civil war might be possible, and I was saying that that might not be a bad thing for them. They might be looking for some chaos and some civil war. That's still, I think, I've read in different areas that they are even looking to possibly break up Iran, so it becomes, it's not one unified country, but it's split up. So again, I think right now we're trying to all figure out exactly what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, we have to bear in mind the U.S. empire has succeeded in doing that twice already. They did that to the Soviet Union. They broke that up, and they further signaled some threats towards breaking up Russia further, and they broke up Yugoslavia. Obviously, the Yugoslavian government was committing crimes and so on. But it was a substantial goal of the U.S. empire to break up a country like Yugoslavia.
Okay, Sam Husseini, thank you so much. I have a lot more to discuss with you. I followed you on
Thank you.
X as well, and I do, read some of your critiques and some of your, ways of looking at things. I know you've been very involved with speaking about, the genocide in Gaza, which has not stopped, and we know that they've closed off now. Again, all the borders going into Gaza. So while they're bombing multiple other countries, they're still keeping their attention on, they're trying to take the attention away while they continue. It's obviously, we all know there's no real ceasefire. The ceasefire is just a propaganda term that they're using while they continue their genocide. But hopefully we can have you on again soon and we can discuss a little bit more. Thank you so much.
Great to be with you. Thank you so much. Salam.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. All right now we are bringing on our next guest, Kathy Kelly. She's an American peace activist, a pacifist, and author, and the founding members of Voices in the Wilderness. Kathy, thank you so much for joining us.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. So talk to us a little bit about what the reaction of the American people is when they see, from the polling and what we've seen in the US, people do not want war. People are struggling. They are struggling to pay the rent. They're struggling for food. They're struggling for healthcare. And when they're seeing all this money going towards bombing other poor people in other countries that have nothing to do with them, they've been trying to get somebody in power that will listen to them. And Trump ran on that kind of platform. He is the anti-war president. He's the peace president. No more new wars. And we see he probably started one of the most catastrophic ones to date.
Well, I believe that the eventual fallout over this war may affect the Trump presidency's prospects. And I think that the Democratic leadership is maybe willing to sit back and hope that fallout would happen around November during the midterm elections. But poll after poll has certainly shown exactly what you've just pointed out, that people aren't looking for a new war. They have to ask who benefits from these wars. But the media doesn't generally help us answer that question. Who benefits? Boeing, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Raytheon, all of the people who provision these reckless killing sprees, whether it's Israel waging genocide against Gaza, or now the United States killing people in Iran, and quite possibly opening up possibilities for new wars. And then these wars become showcases for the weapons. So meanwhile, there's an erosion of international law, which is so serious. I mean, we're losing the United Nations as any kind of effective entity because of the flaunting of international law. And here in the United States, the flaunting of the Constitution. The Constitution says Congress is supposed to have some say-so with regard to waging wars of choice. And this is a war of choice. People in the United States.
So I'm guessing you're not a believer in the Board of Peace?
Well, what a cynical idea that some of the people that have been the most vigorous in bloodshed, displacement, torturing, maiming, and imprisoning people should be called the Board of Peace. It's a savage way to approach the horrendous situation in Gaza. And of course, now people in Iran will be facing displacement, destabilization. And how much do people in the United States really know about Iran? How savvy are we with regard to minorities living in Iran?
I would take that a step further. We saw the interview with Ted Cruz. How much does Trump know about Iran? How much does Ted Cruz or some of these other politicians that can't, that are just seething at the thought of bombing another country? How much do you know about the other country? I would figure they don't know much.
And the other thing US people don't understand is the consequences of economic warfare. And some of us saw that. We went to Iraq steadily to break the economic sanctions from 1996 till 2003. And that was a broken country. People can't live when they can't get the products that they need to run their businesses, to feed their children, to keep their hospitals going. And, that nation of 90 million people in Iran is a sophisticated country. But when they're shunned from international contacts and when civil society can't flourish, you can bet it's going to strengthen a more autocratic, hardline government. We saw that in Iraq as well. But with the economic sanctions having weakened the country so much, now what are they going to do with bombardment of their infrastructure compounding their problems, and then the likelihood of a misunderstanding or no understanding at all on the part of the people that say they're going to enact regime change.
So let me ask you this: what are the American people doing right now to counter this, imperialist war machine that has been on a rampage lately with what's happened in Venezuela, Cuba, Iran, obviously right now, the support of the genocide in Gaza, bombing Syria, Somalia, Nigeria. I mean, it's just been all over the place, nonstop bombing. It's like they cannot stop bombing. What are the American people doing to counter some of that? And I know we cannot depend on the Democrats. They're just as they're a party to the same imperialist problem.
Well, I'm headed out to Seattle to join with a group of peace activists, and we'll move toward going to a United States military base and staging a protest there. But I have to acknowledge and admit, we aren't doing anything commensurate to the crimes being committed. But we have to try. We each have to consult our conscience and try as best we can and ask every day, if I were living under Nazi Germany, what would I do to oppose the Gestapo? And I think that we are looking now at a genocide that is every day claiming lives and disrupting families in Palestine, in the West Bank, and in Gaza. And we're also looking at a U.S. administration that is reckless. And so we have to each try to do what we can. People in my city in Chicago gathered yesterday at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and they will gather again. And I'm sure that for people frightened by what's happening in their cities as bombing is destroying their neighborhoods, this doesn't look like much. But I hope that we'll find internationally throughout the world that grassroots society will say, who benefits? We no longer want to be the enablers of genocide and reckless permanent warfare states.
Does this feel any different to you than other times when people have come out to protest injustices of the empire?
Well, when the United States went to war against Iraq, I was in Iraq in 2003 and also in 1991. So it does feel different to me personally because I'm so safe, I'm so secure right now. I also lived in Afghanistan on and off between 2009 and 2019. And so it looks a lot different when you're living alongside people who can't escape from the bombs, from the night raids, from the terror, from the hunger. So will people in the United States be organizing effectively to build resistance? I'm a little more confident these days because there's so much antipathy toward President Trump. I realize that No More Kings events are really Democratic Party organized events, but at least if people get in the habit of turning out on the streets, as they did in Minnesota, as they did in Chicago, to oppose ICE, as people get in the habit of exercising their First Amendment rights to free speech and connecting with their neighbors and friends to say, we want to shape the world that our children are going to inherit, we might find that there's a more of a strength, more of a robust nature to the peace movement in the United States. But let's remember that all around the world, even though leaders of countries are standing back and watching and letting Trump go ahead with this, on the streets there have been steady demonstrations opposing the genocide in Gaza, opposing the destabilization and displacement of people living in the West Bank and the pogroms that are happening in those cities. And I think these kinds of protests will continue.
So, I don't want to sound very pessimistic, but, we see people protesting in the streets. We saw the student camps against genocide. We see people protesting ICE. And yet the empire is not slowing down. It seems that they're picking up pace. So where do you see kind of the crack that is eventually gonna have to happen between normal people that are opposed to any of this death and destruction and the ones that just live for it?
Well, that's certainly a pressing question, and it's difficult to overcome that pessimism because we haven't seen very much. I mean, we've watched genocide unfold.
And I just want to be clear. Sorry, before you go on, that I'm not saying what people are doing is not important and helpful. It might have been worse without that. So I'm not trying to discourage anybody. I mean, everybody has the responsibility. They have their own individual responsibility to do whatever they can. So I just want to make that clear. But I'm just talking about more of a bigger picture and how far they're willing to go, even beating on their own, people to accomplish some of their imperialist goals.
In my lifetime, from 1980 until I retired, I didn't pay a dime of federal income tax. I successfully managed to resist all forms of that because I thought, I can't pay for these weapons. I'm not paying for these wars. And I've gone to prison several times because of nonviolent protests at nuclear and missile silo sites and at military bases. And actually, I learned a lot by going to prison. I learned a lot about racism in the United States and about how wrongful this so-called criminal justice system is, and how to ask, who are the real criminals? So all of us have this journey of learning that we need to undertake, and we need to find ways that are commensurate to the crimes being committed and overcome our fears.
Anything else you wanted to add before we move on to our next guest?
Well, I actually have a flight to catch, so I can join those Seattle peace activists and prepare to do an action at the
All
military
right, perfect.
base.
Thank you so much. Wish you all the best of luck, and hopefully we'll have you on again soon.
Well, and great that you had Sam Husseini. He's a prophet.
Yeah, he's very good. We want to get him on again as well. Yeah, we have a lot more to discuss with him. Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you,
very
Kathy.
much.
Assalamu alaikum. All right. Thank you, viewers, for joining us on this special live coverage of the U.S.-Israeli aggression on Iran and Iran's retaliation and response. As we know that the Supreme Leader, Ali Khamenei, has been murdered by the bombs that have been dropped within the first phase, and Iran has retaliated, bombing Tel Aviv, Haifa, and other areas in Israel, as well as U.S. assets across the Middle East and in the region, including Qatar, Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia. So I've seen reports of Iraq hitting U.S. bases in Iraq, and we know that the Yemenis have also declared that they are entering, the chat, basically. So we see that there is a lot going on, and we've heard also condemnation from Pakistan saying that they condemn the U.S.-Israeli attack on Iran. We're hoping to have somebody on very soon from Pakistan to discuss with us the situation there, including Pakistan and Afghanistan's cross-border kind of exchanges, where Pakistan has also hit different areas in Afghanistan. There's tensions been there at the border as well. So we see there's a lot of moving parts that are happening and unfolding. And while we have a few minutes, maybe we can just discuss a little bit of that um, history that we were discussing about how we got to this situation. Again, there was already a Iran nuclear deal in place. Trump came into power and tore it up. And Iran stayed on this deal for a year. They were upholding all the different points of the deal for a year until 2019, when finally they said that there seems to be no economic benefit at all to maintaining the deal one-sidedly. So they started winding down their responsibilities in that deal. And we know that they were upholding their part. There was independent investigators and people going into their nuclear sites to make sure that they were complying with all the elements, and they were complying. So, what the U.S. and Israel are claiming that they wanted was already there. So we know, a lot of analysts that have been talking about this are saying that it was never about a nuclear deal or nuclear weapons, because Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, had put out a fatwa saying that it is haram to have a nuclear weapon. It's against the spirit of Islam. So they take out probably the person that was the biggest obstacle to Iran getting a nuclear weapon. And when they look around and they see, for instance, nobody's attacking North Korea, nobody's attacking China, nobody's attacking some of these countries that have nuclear weapons. For me, on an individual level, I don't want nuclear weapons going around anywhere. But there is one country in the Middle East that has nuclear weapons, and undeclared, and not part of the treaty. So I'm just checking here. It looks like we're going to be having a guest on momentarily. Okay, excellent. So we will have somebody on from Pakistan very soon. But Israel is the one that has nuclear weapons. And they are the most, diabolical, belligerent, aggressive country on the planet right now, committing a genocide brazenly, boasting about it. They're not even trying to hide it. They just shut down all access to Gaza again, stopping humanitarian aid, relief, food, all that. What does Gaza have to do with Israel attacking Iran? What does Gaza have to do with that? Why do they have to suffer because you want to just start wars with other countries? Yet they have nuclear weapons. Why aren't every single Western nation, if they had 1 ounce of integrity, that's the one point they should be standing on? Why does Israel have nuclear weapons? Why aren't they part of the treaty? How did they get those nuclear weapons? Why aren't Americans asking that? So there's a lot of things going on here that, when you watch mainstream media, this is why it's important to invest in independent media. We get our funding from people like you that are watching. And in order to grow, in order to have more reporters, in order to do more lives like this, we need more of your support. Because when I was watching mainstream media all day yesterday, and I see what they're talking about. Some of them don't even mention Israel when they're talking about US and Iran. They don't talk about the Iran nuclear deal. They don't mention that. If I'm sure people saw, there was that one clip where the lady's like, so why are you attacking? They were asking the Iranian official, why are you attacking the US military bases? And he's like, are you kidding me? You guys are attacking us. You don't get that in mainstream media. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's talking to the Democrats and saying, hey, Democrats, what are you guys doing about this? Where is the opposition? When the roles are reversed and Democrats are pretending to do something good, Republicans have no problem fighting tooth and nail every inch along the way and turning anything that the Democrats, again, are pretending to do into a Republican bill anyway, or a Republican law. Where are the Democrats that are pretending to fight this? I know there's a few. Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Thomas Massie is obviously Republican, but he's fighting this. Who's fighting it? And you see the people standing up for humanity, the people standing up for anti-war, for the American people. Who are they? You have one president calling Ilhan Omar, asking for her to be deported. She's fighting for the American people, and he's fighting for Israel. Make it make sense. American people are struggling. He's fighting for Israel. Make it make sense. Does it? This is again why it is important to have our own media discussing it from our perspective, our narrative. Putting out real facts and let people understand actually what is going on, not just, Iran. Iran is an evil country, but I don't like how the U.S. You know what? Who are you to talk about Iran? You guys have committed a genocide. You're funding a genocide. You're bombing 8, 9 different countries. Who are you to talk about Iran? Why don't you just focus on where you live and stop your country from bombing other poor people? How about that? Anyways, I think we're ready for went on a little bit of a rant there, but I think we're ready for our next guest. Let's see here. Ahmed Jawad Tahimi is a journalist from Pakistan. Ahmed, you are joining Ahmed. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, and thank you very much for having me, Ahmed.
So, there's a lot that's been going on over the last 48 hours. We've been talking to a few different guests throughout the last hour. But let me hear from you kind of the reaction from a Pakistani perspective, what unfolded and how Israel and the U.S. unprovoked attack on Iran took place.
Well, Ahmed, the situation escalated to a level where we have seen how the sovereignty of an independent, sovereign UN member state has been violated in sheer contravention of the international law, the established international norms and traditions. And that is how it has been termed also when we talk about that emergency meeting at the United Nations Security Council that was convened specifically to talk about this situation that has unfolded because of that attack by the US and Israel jointly against Iran. We saw for a fact a lot of statements coming during that particular meeting. More specifically, as far as Pakistan's position at this point in time is concerned, Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Mr. Asim Iftikhar, categorically condemned these unwarranted attacks against Iran. At the same time, he's also urged all the sides to go back to the negotiations and resolve the issues through dialogue, diplomacy, and negotiations. We've also seen Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif today holding a meeting to review the overall situation in the region also. And more specifically, when we talk about, there were two main agendas of that particular meeting. We know for a fact that there has been unprovoked aggression on the part of the Afghan Taliban, the de facto authorities in Afghanistan, since Pakistan over the last many years has witnessed the resurgence of terrorism because of the inability of the Afghan Taliban to rein in the terrorist groups, which are the absolute red line for Pakistan, including the banned TTP, as well as the BLA, the banned BLA. At this particular crucial moment when Pakistan is faced with along the border with Afghanistan, this situation that has emerged regarding Iran is of a major concern for Pakistan. Regarding this particular assassination, also martyrdom, the way everyone has the right to actually call it or term it the way they want to. Now, this martyrdom has also been talked about by the Pakistani authorities. President of Pakistan, Mr. Asif Ali Zardari, as well as Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif, both have condoled with the authorities in Iran and the public of Iran regarding this martyrdom, which is the assassination, of course, carried out by the US and Israel jointly of the supreme leader of Iran, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. So that is the overall view as far as Pakistan's stated position is concerned. As we know for a fact, Pakistan has always been desirous of peace, stability, not only in the region, but also globally elsewhere as well.
Yeah, you've touched on a lot of points there, and we want to get
Yes,
into
please go
some
ahead.
of that. But let's talk about the protests that have been happening at the consulate in Karachi.
Mhm.
What
Of
what can you
course,
tell
when
us
we
about
talk
that?
about there is a sentiment, yeah, okay. So basically, Ahmed, when we talk about this particular assassination carried out by the US and Israel, when we talk about that emotional association, when that sentiment which is associated of the general public with their Iranian brothers as well, and their supreme leader, who is not only the political as well as the religious, uh, considered as a father figure for the Iranian nation, when he has been targeted by the US and Israel, that actually sentiment and emotion came to the fore. People came out on the streets in the wake of that particular assassination. And we know for a fact the authorities in Pakistan have been cognizant of this particular fact that this emotion will come out. And hence, they had been asking the demonstrators, the protesters in various parts of Pakistan to remain calm, exercise their right to protest as per the Constitution of Pakistan. But given that emotion running high, that sentiment running high, many of the demonstrators and protesters actually trying to vandalize, and more specifically talking about Karachi, they gathered outside or nearer the US consulate over there. So it was incumbent upon the authorities at that point in time in order to control the situation and also ensure the law and order situation. We've also seen there has been a regret that has been expressed by the Sindh government over Chief Minister of Sindh, Mr. Murad Ali Shah, has also urged the demonstrators, the people, to remain calm and exercise the right to protest in a peaceful manner. Yes, Ahmed.
Okay. I just wanted to, because you mentioned, of course, the tension between Afghanistan and Pakistan, and me living here in the West and following the news from our angle, but also following what the community is saying. And the sentiment I tend to come across the most is that we need Pakistan and Afghanistan to stop fighting each other because we got bigger problems. And I don't know what your kind of take on that is. We don't have a lot of time left, but I just wanted to ask you about this because when you have the Zionist entity attacking countries and blowing up people all over the Middle East and Muslim majority countries, and the U.S. now participating is right there in the thick of it, in the middle of it. To see, and again, I'm telling you what I'm seeing, the sentiment of people across the board online, that what is Pakistan and Afghanistan doing? You guys need to come together really and focus on the bigger issues at hand here, because the Muslim Ummah needs you.
That is exactly the point, Ahmed. I wish and authorities here in Pakistan and generally the public in Pakistan had wished for, had there been a realization among the Taliban ranks since they came back into power back in 2021 in the wake of the international troops withdrawal. It was expected it was going to be newer version of the Afghan Taliban. Perhaps they are going to have some sort of transformation from whatever their earlier posture was when they were holding that power back in Afghanistan previously. And they have also made an international commitment that they won't allow the Afghan soil to be used for any of the terrorist purposes. But from over the last more than 4.5 years, we've seen been miserably unable to uphold that particular commitment. So had there
Sorry,
been a realization
Ahmed.
among the Taliban ranks that this,
Yeah, sorry to
please go
cut you
ahead,
off,
please
but
go ahead.
I'm just being told that we're really running out of time. But I really appreciate your time, and hopefully we can discuss a little bit more moving forward. As things, obviously we do not want it to get really bad, but again, we have to be prepared for any outcome. And right now, it looks, things don't look good. So thank you so much. Stay safe, please, and let's talk again soon.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me, Ahmed.
Okay.
It's a pleasure
Assalamu
talking to
alaikum.
you.
And thank you to our viewers so much for joining us on this special live coverage to discuss some different aspects of the Israel-U.S. unprovoked aggression on Iran and Iran's response. You know, we tried to give you more of a backstory on how we got to this point and speak to some different people both in the U.S. and in Pakistan, other places, to see kind of a different perspective than you would normally get from mainstream media, the dinosaur media or legacy media, whatever you'd like to call them. And there are obvious, you know, misrepresentation and demonization of continuously of Muslim majority countries. So thank you for joining us. Please donate to keep channels like this growing, and we're able to do more. And stay tuned because we will have a lot more information. There's a lot more to get through. I have a lot of notes that we did not get through. So stay tuned. Maybe we can have a little bit more discussion in the near future. I'm Ahmed Ramadan. Assalamu alaikum, Ramadan Kareem.